I want to talk about this recent HHS directive to faith-based organizations on health care, Madam President, and suggest that it's exactly the kind of problem that many of us were concerned would develop when the government said it was going to take a greater role in deciding what health care would be like, who would make health care decisions. In this case, what kind of insurance you could give your employees if you're a religious organization. There are several pieces of legislation that might deal with this issue. My guess is there'll be several more unless the administration itself deals with it quickly and withdraws the position they have taken, which is that faith-based institutions would have to offer health insurance policies that violated their faith principles. It is a fundamental First Amendment right of Americans to have the ability to pursue their faith-based principles. In the Religious Freedom Restoration Act of 1993, passed by Congress that was a majority Democrat in both the House and the Senate, signed by President Clinton, it appears to me very clear that this is an intrusion that the law itself, as well as the Constitution, does not allow. And one of the most objectionable things about the White House position, the administration's position, is that we want you to change your principles, but we're going to give you a year to accommodate that change. Now, principles based on faith cannot be accommodated in a year. In fact, they shouldn't be accommodated in a lifetime. They are exactly that. They are principles based on faith. And this is about institutions that run hospitals, that run schools, that run daycare centers, that run all sorts of things under the umbrella of the mission of who they are. And this is about how their employees relate to them as providers of health care insurance and the kind of insurance they provide. This is not about just anybody you might run into. This is someone who's chosen to work for one of these institutions. This is someone who's chosen to affiliate themselves with one of these faith-based organizations. And clearly, the Catholic bishops are outraged by this. I've got a letter here from Bishop Carlson in St. Louis that was read in Missouri churches last week talking about this, and it says, in so ruling, the administration has cast aside the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States, denying to Catholics our nation's first and most fundamental freedom, that of religious liberty. And as a result, unless the rule is overturned, we Catholics will be compelled either to violate our conscience or to drop health coverage for our employees and bring about the consequences for all in doing so. The administration's sole concession was to give nonprofit employers like hospitals and universities, which do not currently provide such coverage, the coverage that the administration was demanding, that's not in the letter, do not currently provide such coverage, 1 year in which to comply. I've got another report from the chief of Catholic military chaplains who wanted to send a letter to be read, who initially the military said couldn't be read. The United States Army said that the letter written and sent by the the Archbishop in charge of Catholic military chaplains could not be read in services. And after a meeting, after a discussion with the Secretary of the Army, that was changed, but only apparently when some of the letter was agreed would be taken out. Now, this is way over the line of where the government should be. Unfortunately, it's exactly the line that many of us feared would be crossed whenever the government begins to think that the government is the person to make healthcare decisions, whether that's a decision that you and your doctor should be making between the two of you, or the kind of insurance you and your family choose to have, or in this case, the kind of insurance you and the institution you represent chooses to offer to the people that are working there. And this is wrong. I think people know it's wrong. This is something that cannot be allowed to stand. and I'd like to turn to my friend from New Hampshire to talk about this with me for a little bit.
Well, thank you, Madam President. I certainly share the concerns of my colleague from Missouri, and I share the concerns of my constituents in New Hampshire and citizens across this nation who see the recent rule issued by the administration for what it is, an unprecedented, unnecessary affront to religious liberty in our country. And I'd like to say at the outset that this issue isn't limited to the Catholic Church. The administration's new health care mandates on religious institutions impact all religions. And Madam President, religious freedom is a foundational American right enshrined in our Bill of Rights. The First Amendment to our Bill of Rights makes clear that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Unfortunately, I see the administration chipping away at these bedrock freedoms as it engages in a troubling pattern here with respect to this rule. And I think that we saw that the president's new mandate on religious institutions highlights the deep flaws in the health care bill. This unconstitutional law was moved through Congress and signed by the president 2 years ago without the type of due consideration, transparency, or accountability we would all expect. And we've been suffering the consequences since. And it's highlighted with what we see with these recent mandates from the Health and Human Services. I'd like to share some of the concerns that my constituents have raised about these mandates that were recently issued by Health and Human Services. There's a letter that I received this week from William Edmund Fahey, who is the president of Thomas More College in Merrimack, New Hampshire, and he says this: to condition the availability of medical benefits upon a community's willingness to violate a cardinal teaching of its faith effectively prevents the full practice of its religion and thus again violates the free exercise of a constitutional liberty. He pleaded with our delegation, the New Hampshire congressional delegation, and he said, I hope that you will see that the mandate undermines the Constitution, compromises the integrity of the government, and abuses the foundational principle that free associations form an essential part of the social fabric of the United States. We're fortunate in New Hampshire to have a number of very effective Catholic institutions and organizations. We have the Catholic Medical Center in Manchester, who serves so many in the Manchester community and surrounding areas. The Catholic Medical Center has also expressed concerns about this mandate, saying it would force us to offer services that were against our ethical and religious directive or force us not to offer insurance altogether. They added, neither are acceptable options, and the government should not put the Catholic Medical Center or any other Catholic organization who does such wonderful work in the state of New Hampshire and throughout this country in this position. The president of one of our great colleges in New Hampshire, St. Anselm College, President Jonathan D. Felice, said this: in a country and a state that values and respects individuals' rights to exercise their religious beliefs and live according to their conscience' best lights, it is simply appalling to think that this mandate is anything other than an unprecedented incursion into freedom of conscience. I've heard many concerns from my constituents, and I would hope that Health and Human Services would stop what it's doing right now, this mandate that places religious institutions in this impossible position and with this impossible choice of violating their core beliefs in order to comply with a mandate or dropping employee insurance coverage altogether. We should not be putting these organizations that do great work throughout this country in that position. And again, this isn't an issue that just applies to the Catholic Church. This applies to all religious institutions. And I would ask my colleague from the state of Missouri, as a result of our concerns about the actions of the administration. We have offered legislation to address this, and what does that legislation do in order to make sure that this mandate does not go forward?
I think that's a good point, and I'd also like to say that this is not about just one set of religious beliefs. Now, the current discussion is about specific items in a health care plan, but there are lots of faith-based groups that have different views of how you deliver health services. Working on these issues for some time now, I've met with a lot of these groups. And this is an issue of conscience. Whether it's the Catholic Church, the Christian Science Church, the Seventh-day Adventist Church, the Baptist Church that I'm a member of, there may be different views of this, but the views are not views that can be put forth by the government, and that becomes the government view. You know, there was a recent Supreme Court case, a school, Hosanna Tabor Academy versus Equal Opportunity Commission, where the court voted 9-0 that faith-based institutions have privileges that others do not have, because that's what makes them faith-based institutions. The hiring decisions, the firing decisions, the workplace decisions are different, because if they're not different, it's just another school or another hospital that might happen to have a theology department or might happen to have a chapel once a week. That's what it is. So Senator Ayotte and I and others, Senator Rubio, have worked on various ways to approach this. We offered a bill some weeks ago now that would on these issues of conscience that would create a respect for rights of conscience. The Respect for Rights of Conscience Act, which was drafted early last year, has the full support of the major groups that are concerned about these conscience issues. The Christian Medical Association, the Becket Fund, and others have said that we need to be concerned about these issues, whether it's a hiring decision now or now a health care decision. And what do we do to protect health care providers and insurers, including purchasers, from being forced to violate their own principles by buying a policy or offering a policy that provides things that they don't believe in their faith group are the right things to offer. Saying, well, maybe the 1 year, suddenly this 1 year has become, we're just seeking information during this year. That's not what they were doing at all. What they were doing was saying, you're going to comply with this rule, and we're going to give you a year to figure out how to compromise your principles in a way that applies, and that's a wrong thing to do. And so whether it's the Respect for Rights of Conscience Act or other legislation, if the administration doesn't take care of this administratively, I believe it will be taken care of legislatively. When you've got bishops, when you've got church leaders, when you've got people that have spent their life dedicated to hospitals and schools and other institutions that reflect their faith principles, you can't just suddenly decide that those don't matter or they can be changed in a year. They also will need to have some legal cause of action just to pursue this, just like the Religious Freedom Act in 1993 created cause of action. You can't go in and have an unreasonable incursion on the faith beliefs of people under the First Amendment. No matter how good you think the cause might be, it's not good enough to violate that fundamental principle. Senator Ayotte has had lots of contact from our side. I think many of us have. You know, if you were last week, if you were in a military service, you might have heard one of these letters read. And I just saw the line that had to be taken out of the letter, apparently, that the Army wouldn't otherwise was standing in front of, but was read in the other services, was the line that said, we will not comply with this unjust law. When the government begins to tell people to do things that violate their faith principles, the government has gone too far, and I yield back.